This video is just going to be me talking about, some of the places that I remember. This place was over 20 years ago. And yeah, we'll go around to the front, and I'll show you why it was so hard to find this hotel for an American on their first trip to Europe. It's a little busier around front. There's a beer truck. There's a little door down here, and it is labeled Hotel Lindenufer, and it just took me forever to notice it because I was expecting like a whole building with big signs and everything. I didn't realize that hotels in Europe can just be like the upper floors of a building, and you just have like a little entrance on street level, so it's not like just staring you in the face the way that an American might expect a hotel to appear. So it's a little busier out on this side. I don't remember it being quite this much stuff going on, but right here is the little door, and I'm not sure if it was the same door, but I remember that you can't even just walk in there. And once I found this place, I was like, okay, why can't I walk in? I should be able to just walk right into a hotel. And no, you had to like push a buzzer. It took me forever to figure out, like, I have to push this buzzer and somebody has to like answer on the other side, and like I know I'm not going to be able to speak to them because I don't know the language. And so like I just stood out there trying to figure out, like, why can't I get through this door, until I finally worked up the courage that it took to push the buzzer. A very un-American thing to be doing. And the only other thing of note here, I mean, this area tends to be a little bit quieter and wealthier than other parts of Berlin. And so it is a good starter area. And I woke up the next morning very, very early, having seen out, I don't know if it was like out the restaurant window or something, but having seen a church steeple nearby. And so now we shall go and find that church steeple that was the first old thing that I went to see. So for reference, there's Hotel Lindenufer right there, and the church very first old thing that I went to see upon my very first arrival and first day in Berlin was just this nearby old structure. And this was it. I mean, this was the first old thing that I saw in Berlin. And so even though it was so heavily destroyed during World War II, there are still tons and tons of old things such as this around Berlin, just old churches that survive to this day. So that is that's the first trip, right? The first stay. And like I said, learned a ton of stuff about some of the differences between the country that I was so used to and this new city a third of the way across the world. And I kind of came to like those differences that you would notice, and picked more and more up over the years of visiting Berlin, and also picked up some of the language. So we'll next go to see my second trip to Berlin, which was for the purpose, officially at least, of learning some German. Hey dog. The dogs are typically well behaved in Germany, and here we are at the second place, or where I stayed on my second trip to Berlin. I was here for, I think, a month and a half to do a language course, and it wasn't that easy to find a longer term, stay type place where you could stay for a month or more. And this was the place I ended up finding on the internet. There was no Airbnb, there was no Booking.com, and yeah, this was available. So right down here, there's some shuttered windows, and it looks really kind of not so great from the outside, but inside of there, it was a nice enough little apartment, very, very little space, but it had like a little cooking range, little sink for the kind of efficiency apartment thing, and it was behind one of these shuttered things here. So if I remember correctly, it would be this door here that I would go into, and then walk down to this little subway entrance. And I started to figure out that this area is kind of like the gay neighborhood of Berlin is right over there beyond, on the other side of that subway station, the Nollendorfplatz station. And finally, this was confirmed by one of the teachers at this language school I was at, where she asked me where I was staying, and I said Nollendorfplatz, and she said, "Oh, well, that's kind of the gay center of Berlin." And a lot of this stuff, I think, was built in the 60s and 70s. So today, the people who live here are, I think, a little bit older crowd, but probably 60s, 70s, even the 80s, this would have been a more happening area. But it is just kind of a typical part of West Berlin, very typically West Berlin, with these kind of nondescript 60s, 70s kind of structures, and a very old subway stop here. So my entrance to the subway, being this one, goes under all those busy roads. So this is where I would always try to enter and exit once I figured out how to get to this exit. And I would take the subway line here, so there's a couple different lines, but the one I would take to get to my school each day, my language school, was, I don't know the number of it, perhaps the U4. And the U4, if it's the one I'm thinking of, will get us to a transfer point that I would then have to transfer, and it was quite an operation to get not that far to this language school. I mean, geographically it's not that far, but it turned out transportation-wise to be quite an effort to get there. And here we are approaching on our way to the German language school that I attended. Sometimes I would pass by this building right here, which is Hauptstrasse 155. And as you can see, they've got this memorial here to David Bowie, and it explains that he lived in this building during the time that he recorded some of his more famous albums, Lodger, Low and Heroes. And as my friend Tom will remind you, David Bowie did indeed share this apartment that they had in this building with one Iggy Pop. So that is what David Bowie's old apartment looks like today. Try and get a little bit of the building itself. It's not a whole lot to see. It's just kind of a standard yellow, light-colored structure at Hauptstrasse 155. So let me see if I can locate exactly. This is probably the best view. It's really hard to see back there, and this was another strange thing where it's like I arrived here, so that kind of white building way back there, I arrived here the first day of class, and I'm like expecting, kind of like the hotel thing, expecting to see a building that's obviously a school, or obviously like this language school, and there really wasn't much at all out here on the street. So you're like looking around, you can kind of see the white building way back there, and it's all kind of guarded, it's all kind of blocked off and not very welcoming looking. And then eventually I noticed maybe one of the signs one of the little squares up here might have said like the name of the school, and again it's like, okay, now what? So it was another case of like having to find a button and pushing the button out here, and somebody answering in German, and I don't speak German, and eventually them kind of telling me, go back into this weird area that Americans would never feel welcome in. This kind of like narrow weirdness back there. You can see some people just walking around back there. Right now I'm on a way to a Pinkelplatz, or a pee place, because it does tend to be quite difficult to find bathrooms when you're out and about in Berlin, and there's one down here that I just happened to kind of remember from previous trips. And I thought I'd maybe give you a feel for generally what Berlin is kind of like and known for if you've never been here before, maybe you're thinking about going. As far as the native Berliners go, they're known for being a little bit playful in a way. Sometimes they can be a bit purposely rude, but for the most part I think a little bit more confrontationally playful, you might say. And there's a term, Berliner Schnauze, which is kind of, it kind of embodies the whole concept of what a native Berliner kind of is in terms of attitude and such. When it comes to transportation, Berlin is has a very complex and very, let's say, complete public transportation system. They have the U-Bahn, which is mainly underground, like a subway or an underground rail system. And then above ground we have the S-Bahn, mainly above ground, let's say, which also tends to serve a little bit farther out communities that aren't so close to the center of Berlin. So those two rail systems that kind of interconnect are very easy, I would say, to navigate if you're good at reading maps, at least. So, like I tend to be. And the Pinkelplatz is coming up. There's a little gray building down there, so we're approaching now where I'm going to make a pit stop. But the last thing maybe we can mention right now is kind of typifies Berlin. Let's talk a bit about the food. Probably the best known food that you find in Berlin that sort of typifies it is the currywurst. It's like a sausage that they cut into little round pieces and throw onto a little paper plate. And then on top of those little pieces of sausage comes a curry sauce. And it's quite delicious if you ask my opinion. They give you a little piece of wood that's like a little fork, and you just kind of pick the little pieces of sausage up with their sauce on them. And you run across these döner. They call them like a döner. It's almost like a gyro or something like that you could get from more of a Greek source, but most of that stuff in Berlin and Germany is going to come from a Turkish style. And it's just a big, it's like a gyro sandwich, and those are found throughout Germany, but they are very, very typical of Berlin and everywhere in Berlin. And it used to be that you would actually see, when I first started coming to Berlin, you could still see a lot of those shops where the people who worked there would actually have a big sword, and they would shave this spinning spit of meat with this big sword, which was kind of cool to watch. And I have not seen anybody using the sword here for many years. So those are the two most typical items as far as food goes that I can think of that are really typical of Berlin. And now I'm going to make a pit stop before we head off to the third location that we need to cover, which was when I came to Germany looking for work. So we will go there next.
Baby, I'm bad, I just wanna get caught up in this life, I'm crazy, I'm mad, do it no cap, only got one, so you better go live it up, cash in the bag, stadium packed, baby, I'm bad.
We're looking for the intersection of Warschauer Straße and Grüneberger Straße, which is where I will at least hopefully have some memories of when I stayed for my third time here in Berlin. Stayed here for a month in January, which, if you want to find a perfect place to be sort of in a depressing kind of environment, try Berlin in the winter time, especially after Christmas stuff closes down. Whoa, January, February in Berlin, if you are in a funk, this is the place to do it right, because you will experience gray skies, just this bone-chilling kind of wet, cold type of air, dirty snow, old Christmas trees just tossed on the sidewalk. I mean, Berlin's a place to be in January, trust me, if you're really into that kind of that feel of like oppressed kind of environment. So I spent January, must have been almost 20 years ago now, on Grüneberger Strasse at a hostel. And that hostel was at that time called something Odyssey Hostel. Something Odyssey. And I don't think it's still there anymore, but we are going to find out, see where that place used to exist. You would like go back almost in a little driveway, such as this right here. So it was another weird situation where it wasn't like obvious to an American what you were supposed to do, where you're supposed to go. But it's like if you can imagine those doors being open and there's like a driveway going through there, and then way back is where that hostel was at, and you would walk up these stairs, like this long set of stairs, before you got up to the first, the reception area of the hostel, where they had like a little bar area. They had a little computer room.
All personnel, please evacuate to the nearest lab and report to your supervisor.
So right in there, I believe that was the McDonald's that was seen briefly in the movie Das Leben der Anderen. And it's also the McDonald's that I used to get my McRibs at, and spent one very hungover day trying to just get one McRib down in that former McDonald's, believed to be used in a film about East Germany here on Frankfurter Tor. You can see all of this Stalinist architecture. There's some balconies up there, and we'll get a little better look at the architecture. And I'll try to extend this a little bit. There's so many people around, and they're so interested in like also interested, yes, but also, how can I put it? A lot of people, especially in this area, don't like YouTubers, don't like people hanging out with selfie sticks and that kind of stuff. So it's like I gotta keep the selfie stick to a minimum and kind of closed up for the most part. But this is what Frankfurter Tor looks like with all of that. Right there is some wedding cake style architecture all along what was once a socialist thoroughfare. I believe this would have been Karl Marx Strasse along here at the time of the existence of East Germany and East Berlin. And you can see the apartments where all of the bigwigs, the Bonzen, would have lived in those old Soviet-style apartments such as that, and perhaps anyone who still survives from that era or their children may perhaps own or reside in some of those apartment buildings today. So there you have it, from Frankfurter Tor, near the hostel that we can't quite exactly locate, that I stayed in for a month when I was looking for a job. Eventually did find a job, by the way, but not here in Berlin. It was in a city not too far away, and I had a chance to come back here on many occasions since then. So I'm gonna say, for now, we're gonna call it. I'm very busy Frankfurter Tor, people having trouble walking.